All right, so our next talk is about habitat versus niche, and I don't know if you've heard these terms. So what I want to do is make sure you understand what they are, and then we'll spend a little time with that. So habitat is basically an organism's place in the world where they are found, where they live, whereas a niche is kind of the third grade answer, which my wife teaches, would be their job. What role do they play? How do they fit into the ecosystem? So what is their ecological role? And so those differ a bit. And so when we're talking about niches, we're also talking about animals typically have, and even plants, are generalists or specialists. And so what that term means is we're looking at, how they exist. So a generalist, they have a bigger niche breadth because they don't specialize on any one thing like coyotes. They eat lots of different things. They'll eat rodents, rabbits, unfortunately pets. We'll talk about that. But raccoons the same way. Actually coyotes eat berries too and fruit. It turns out during parts of the year, a big part of their diet consists of fruits. And then cockroaches, just to give you an insect version of a generalist. Specialists, on the other hand, their niche breadth is very, very narrow because they are keying into things. So pandas niche are bamboo forests. Anteaters obviously are eating nothing strictly but ants, and then koalas are keyed into eucalyptus. Their niche is very, very thin, small. And the problem then can become is these are organisms that are very dependent on a certain thing, and if that thing disappears, they can easily disappear. All right, some other terms that we would like to know is native versus non-native. Native means that they're found in their original area, and that assumption means that they're native. They got there on their own, not man carried them. So plants. So again, we talked about our biome here is coastal sage scrub. So the plants you'll see here, and we got a picture on the left down here, is coastal sagebrush, white sage, black sage, California buckwheat. These are all things that would be typically found around here. And then an animal, and I just picked this one because I wanted to make a point. So, and that would be the California gray squirrel. And the non-native species, plants around here can be what we call invasive. They take over so quickly that they wipe out the local plants. I didn't type it out, but I missed that. But it would be mustard. That's black mustard down there on the bottom. And that yellow plant is a sign in Southern California of disturbance. It means that the habitat has been disturbed. And mustard is a plant that seeds very quickly. It grows very quickly and just kind of outcompetes everything. And so when you drive around Southern California, you're going to see a lot of mustard. That tells you California is very disturbed. And I'm not talking about the people, although that may also be true. And then I'm introducing for an animal is a fox squirrel. Okay, so California gray squirrels are these tree squirrels that have always been here in Southern California. And the fox squirrel is the new introduction. It's from back east. And they're taking over the world. And matter of fact, I have them in my yard. I have them on my roof. They're a pain in the butt. And unfortunately, the predators don't know how to deal with them well. And so they are pushing, unfortunately, our California gray squirrels out. All right, and again, we use the term indicator species or biometers. We gave you that before, species that can provide warnings to let us know that we have issues. I do want you to know that amphibians are disappearing due to all kinds of problems. There's parasites for flatworms, and then there are some other pathogens, viral and fungal diseases, habitat loss and fragmentation, UV radiation, the ozone layer. Their eggs especially, because they are gelatinous, they are clear, get hit pretty hard, cause mutations, pollution in the water, cause all climate change. Things are drying up, and then overhunting. They're actually still eaten, hunted for food. Good luck. Yeah, these guys are being hammered. Another concept we want to talk about is a keystone species. These are species that actually increase biodiversity. Often they're predators. So we think of predators, well, they're eating everything. What this does is it allows for biodiversity to include. So what I want to do is start with this this slide here. In here you can see we have sea stars. There's several of them, and that usually tells you when you see a lot of sea stars, you have a healthy tide pool ecosystem. And these guys eat mussels and clams and things like that. And they are the keystone species in our local tide pools. This was done by a guy named Castro that taught at Cal Poly Pomona. And Pyasador is actually this ochre sea star right here. And what he did is he went in the 60s and actually took out sea stars out of certain tide pools. And this is what he discovered. If you look, a typical tide pool would have 18 or 19 species. And then when he pulled the Pyaster out, what happened was major drop in a number of species present. And this is a hard concept for people to you get down to 1 or 2 species. And it's a hard concept for people to get. But what that means is here I've got all these different species, you got 10 species. And what happens is if there's a keystone predator, if any one of them start to try to explode and take over, that's what the sea star eats because there's lots of them. So it keeps that biodiversity down. If you take away the keystone predator, 1 or 2 species explode and outcompete and push everybody else out, which leaves you with what we call a monoculture that we will talk about later, which is not good. So this is our local. Now in California, here in Walnut, California, the keystone species is the coyote. This is the one that keeps populations in check. When this thing is around, we have more bird species, more mammal species. You remove the coyote, you end up with 1 or 2 species. And that's typically ones we don't want. Those are rats, it can be rabbits or squirrels, things that are causing issue. In Walnut, California, unfortunately, they've had over the years where they've killed coyotes, and that is a problem. What'll happen is people will get upset. Yes, Fluffy died, and what you get is somebody calling City Hall crying that Fluffy is dead. You have to do something, and so because we don't understand nature, and Fluffy dead is sad, trust me. But Fluffy should have been in the house, and so Fluffy has died, and the phone calls come in, so the city council decides we're going to kill all the coyotes. What happens is that same person now calls back 3-4 years later and says, hey, we got a problem. I got a rat problem. You need to do something. And so what do? They stop killing coyotes. And those numbers come back up, and then the rat population drops back down. And then Fluffy 2 is out, and then Fluffy 2 gets killed, and it's a vicious cycle. And unfortunately, just a couple years ago, Walnut was going back into the trapping and killing of coyote species. And the first time was back when we, in the probably late 90s, early 2000s, several people from Mount Sac went over to the committee and said, hey, this is not smart. The coyotes are essential. They didn't listen, and they still don't listen. We don't learn from our mistakes. Keep Fluffy 3 in the house. That's all I got to say. Some other keystone species. Another one is the American alligator. Back in Florida, they were definitely threatened, being taken out. And so it turns out just their behavior, they make gator holes they lay in and nesting mounds, and this supported a bunch of different other wildlife. And so once those numbers started back up, once we stopped killing them, the Everglades and things have recovered. from the devastation. But there's a new problem out there now, an invasive species, Burmese and African pythons, are being released. People get them as pets, fairly small. Then they get fairly large, as you can see in the picture down at the bottom, and can't be taken. So they just release them into the wild, which is never a good idea. Throws off issues. So right now there's a bounty on pythons, introduced pythons in Florida. All right, and then shark species. Unfortunately, there's 480 species, give or take. That's not unfortunate. The unfortunate part is they're all being hammered. We don't know enough about them. We have this fear, such a fear now that we have Shark Week. You know, every other animal gets a day. These guys get a week. Actually, I think it's a month now. And there is, unfortunately, a process called finning, where they'll use the shark's fins for shark fin soup. It's added for flavor. There is no evidence that it is nutritious or it adds something that you have to have. And unfortunately, it's pretty barbaric. As they catch the shark, they cut the fins off, and then they just chuck them back into the water where they can't swim, and they end up dying. And one of the reasons they do that is that it will bring in other sharks, which then they can continue to fin. So over a quarter are threatened, and these might be the most vulnerable and least protected of all animals. And again, it's that fear we have of sharks, and very few people, more people die from bee stings than a shark attack. And so Vogel principle, resources are either renewable or non-renewable and must be treated accordingly. These species, I mean, we could harvest alligator if we really need to for boots and things, but if you do it sustainably, they'll still be around. But if you treat them just as a profit raising scheme and don't take care of them, then it's going to be non-renewable and they will disappear. All right, and so the last concept here we have is extinction, and that's where, and we'll talk about this more, but I just want to mention it here. We have a couple of background extinction. Things go extinct all the time. We're never going to stop that, and shouldn't. 99.9% of all the things that have lived on this planet have gone extinct. Humans eventually are gonna, I hate to tell you, are going to go extinct. The ones that are most likely are called endemic species, species that are only found in one place. You don't find them anywhere else. There are some plants around here. Actually, one plant, Catalina Island, has a Catalina ironwood. It's a tree and only found on Catalina. There are some grows, and every time that Catalina catches on fire, they're afraid that they will all disappear. They can raise them in captivity. It's not easy to do, and we have some on campus that have been planted. But again, definitely happening. And we have some mass extinctions, and the one that's famous, obviously 66 million years ago, was the dinosaur extinction at the Cretaceous, at the KT boundary. And then the biggest mass extinction on the planet was the Permian, about 250 million years ago, where over 90% of all living things kind of disappeared. And there were 3 others. And unfortunately, right now, we may be in the 6th. We are seeing some of the largest disappearances in rate in the last 50 to 100 years. So this is probably, if we survive, they'll look back and say that when you're living right now was the 6th mass extinction. And Vogel principle, principles of stress, overuse, and system backlash. If we don't stop what we're doing, the planet will reset itself. And that might be with the extinction of millions of different species, and including ourselves. And so there is also some threatened species. So I just want to mention one that you're probably aware of. Threatened means they're not endangered yet, but they could be. Monarch butterfly, it's considered a threatened species. Now, part of the problem is it migrates from Mexico all the way up to Canada, And so there's all kinds of issues with the travel route. The two major threats is what I want you to know: loss of forests in Mexico and the lack of milkweed in the US. Unfortunately, the milkweed is right where we would put agriculture or housing. And so we are losing a lot of their habitat. We need to keep them. They are pollinators. They're great pollinators. We need to keep them around. And just ethics. I mean, they're beautiful, and they have a right to live. And then just the last thing, amphibians and sustainability. There's a part in the book I would want you to be aware of, and this is actually the red-legged frog. And this is unfortunately the picture of the red-legged frog is tough. There's not great ones. The reddish color is underneath here, under the legs. They're almost extinct in California. They are found in Baja, and they were at a place called the Santa Rosa Plateau in their vernal pools. These vernal pools will fill up with water during parts of the year and then dry out. And here's the egg sacs. What has happened is they really have taken it hammered. This is actually the frog that Mark Twain talked about in his books. And it got down to where in Santa Rosa Plateau, they only found 3 frogs left, a male and 2 females, and the male was not with the females. So they actually moved them. They got eggs and they took them to the LA Zoo. Now they're collecting more eggs in Baja. Again, the same species. Again, there should be some genetic diversity there that might be a little bit different. But they are working with Mexico to try to reestablish the red-legged frogs in the Santa Rosa Plateau. And we will stop the share and stop the recording.